Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We are very pleased to have you joining us. Have a really exciting, interesting presentation coming up for you in our series, Evolving from Assessment to Learning Improvement, a professional webinar series that you've, I'm sure, read about as you were registering. It's partnered with James Madison University Center for Assessment and Research Studies, their CARS program, along with Virginia Assessment Group and their Journal of Research and Practice and Assessment. And we have 6 webinars in this series. We had one a couple of weeks ago, and this is the second one for today. And of course, the focus is on moving assessment to learning improvement, and I think you will surely enjoy what you hear today from our 2 presenters. Before we get into that, I would like, first of all, to go through a couple of slides for those who might be new to our webinars. You see in front of you now the Zoom webinar control panel that you should have on your screen. And just to familiarize you a bit with it, on the left side is a place for your audio, whether you're on your phone or your computer, and mute, which you actually are not allowed to unmute for the webinar because there are so many of you out there. As you move across, there is a chat section, which a couple of people have already sent messages over, but if you have a question you want to send in to us, if you're having problems, anything that we might help you with technically. The next is just raising your hand if you want to have a quick notification to the host, but probably just sending the chat is just as easy. And then you also have the question and answer area where you can submit questions to the presenters, and we will be taking those questions throughout their presentation, but we will hold them until after the presentation and then go into a Q&A session. You'll also at some point early on actually in the webinar, we will be doing some polls. And then if you need to leave the webinar for any reason, need to head out for another meeting or whatever, there's a place on the right side for you to do that. So that's the webinar control panel. And then also, I think the next slide is going to go into our agenda for today. Going back one more. There we go. With our welcome, and then we've gone through those logistics, and we're going to do the introductions and polls for a second. So let me just, at this point, announce the polls to you. We have like 3 polls we'd like to present in order to learn a bit more about the audience so that our speakers can know a bit more about who's out there. So as these come up, and you should be seeing one right now, the first poll says to please select the response that best describes your college or university. A community college, private 4-year institution focused primarily on undergraduate education, private 4-year with a mix of undergraduate and graduate, a public 4-year focused primarily on undergraduate, and public 4-year with a mix of undergraduate and graduate, a research university, or an other. And if you can take some time to do that, we'll, as soon as we get most of you responding, we'll share the results of that poll. Oh, wow, came in very well. So about 12% community college, 4% private 4-year undergraduate, 17% private 4-year mix, about 3% public 4-year undergrad, and 37%, the biggest majority, are public 4 years with a mix, and then about 21% from research universities. So that's great. And then if we can close that poll, let's see about the next one. How many students approximately are enrolled at your institution? Less than 3,000 students, between 3,001 and 10,000, or over 10,000? We'll give you a few seconds to respond to that one. So 58% of you are at institutions with over 10,000 students, and 24% between 3 and 10,000, and 18% less than 3,000. Very good. And a third poll question is, this one's a little bit more detailed, but it's going to be good for the presenters to know. Select the response that best captures your primary role at your institution: administrator, assessment professional, educational developer, faculty member heavily involved in assessment in your department or program or on an assessment committee, faculty member little or no involvement with assessment work, institutional researcher, staff member heavily involved in assessment in your department or program, staff member with little or no involvement, and other position at your college or university. Really, I know for many of us, we could probably click a couple of those, but the one that primarily captures your role. So we have the sharing now, and assessment professionals, 63%. Wow. So we've got a lot of you here today. That's great. And let's see, that would probably be followed up with about 8% of faculty who are heavily involved, 8% institutional researchers, 8% staff members. Very good. So most of us, which is kind of typical of our webinars, are assessment professionals. So that's great. Thank you so much for taking part in that poll. I'm sure that Charlie and Kathy are going to appreciate knowing who it is that they're talking to. And then to go into the introduction just very quickly, again, I don't want to take so much time here because I want them to get involved, but the name of our presentation today is "The More Things Change, the More They Stay the Same." And many of you know the organization from which these two speakers come from, and the heads of the consortium, and use the data that they are so well manage and provide for us in making important decisions. Charlie is the director and Kathy is associate director. And the only other thing that I will say is just to kind of read from their mission statement, which I think is really important to know what they are committed to. And that is, they are committed to sharing data, knowledge, and expertise to advance undergraduate liberal arts education, inclusive excellence, and student success at member institutions. So we are delighted to have them with us today, and I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful presentation. So at this time, I will turn it over to Charlie and Kathy. Thank you so much for being here.
Right, awesome. Let's see, we're gonna start my screen. Let's see if I can go back here. Let's see if I can go back to share the screen. Let me see. Okay, you should see our presentation. Is that right?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for taking time to listen to us today. We're going to talk. This chat is going to be about. We're going to talk about some issues we've been struggling with, frankly, for almost a decade now. So it'll probably be a little bit like therapy for us in a way. So we appreciate your listening. And we're thinking about thoughts that for us we've been going through and working with as we've been working with institutions and doing assessment work for this last 10 years, and thinking constantly about the issue of what will help that assessment data pay off more for institutions and for the good people who are working so hard to collect the data, make sense of it, use it, and try and enact something with it. And so we're going to talk about that today, and some of these thoughts are real recent. We keep working on this problem as we keep working with institutions, and you'll be hearing the latest and greatest, and we look forward to hearing back what you think about it. But to sum up, what we're going to say is that it may be worthwhile as we do assessment to stop talking about assessment as a method of improving student learning. Assessment serves a bunch of purposes. We'll talk about those. Among those is one which is really aimed at improving student learning, but there are others which are not. And that may help us in terms of our design, the way we design assessment, and maybe help others who are looking at our processes, looking at what we do when we do assessment, understand what we're trying to do. So here's the arc of our webinar. It's like the Ark of the Covenant from Raiders of the Lost Ark, but a little more boring. We'll have some intros. Kathy will talk a little bit about just who we are, what we do briefly. Then we'll tell a tale of assessment woe, the thing that really started us thinking about this issue of the relationship between data, the quality of data, and the action to respond to it and change and improve student learning. We'll flip from the concerns we developed in our tale of woe to some more recent and public concerns or publicized concerns from folks about assessment. And then I'll have a kludge in my PowerPoint here, but we'll then ask a question. So assessment, what is it really good for? What is it helping us do? And then we'll talk about 3 ways we think it's helping us, and 3 things that it does for us, all of which are helpful, but they're very different. And then we'll finish up with some suggestions. So on to the next slide here. And Kathy.
All right, hello everyone. We're so glad to join you this afternoon. So I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about who we are, who Charlie and I am, and the work that we do. So we run 2 different organizations. The first is the Center of Inquiry, and we've led that organization since 2000. And at the center, we work with faculty, staff, administrators, and students to improve learning and teaching at 2- and 4-year colleges and universities across the country. So that's a nonprofit organization. We have done national research projects looking at the conditions that promote student learning while they're in college. And now we spend a lot of our time doing consulting on areas of assessment. We run workshops for faculty, do grant evaluation, and a variety of things. They're all focused on using evidence for improving learning and teaching. And then we also, since 2011, have run the Higher Education Data Sharing Consortium, which is a mouthful, so the shorter name is HEADS. And that is a consortium of 145 private colleges and universities. And in that organization, we administer a lot of surveys, and we provide assessment support. And I think that the key thing is the focus in all of our work, regardless of the organization or the time period, is that we have always been focused on improving learning and teaching so that students benefit more from their college experience. And we have worked with hundreds of institutions across the country of all different types, publics and privates of different sizes, selectivity, with different missions. And I think that's a truly special part of our work, and one thing that we both really enjoy is just getting to meet so many wonderful people across the country who are trying to do good things for their students. So, as Charlie said, we're going to start with a tale of assessment woe. And this is a personal story about our work and how it failed. And I know this is kind of a downer to begin with, and we promise we will move on to more positive things throughout this webinar. As I mentioned before, we did a national research project looking at the conditions that help students learn in college. And that was the Wabash National Study. And we've talked about this in a bunch of places, so if you've heard us present on this before, I apologize for repeating things. But we really wanted to start by talking about the Wabash study because it provides important context for our work on assessment over the past 14 plus years, and important context for the way we're thinking about assessment now. So the Wabash study involved 49 institutions and over 17,000 students from those institutions. Again, wide range of institutions. It was a longitudinal study where we followed students throughout 4 years of college. And the purpose of the study, as it says on the screen, is to identify the practices and conditions that promote liberal arts education. And that was defined broadly. And also to collaborate with faculty, staff, students, and administrators to use that evidence from the study for improvement. So the Wabash study was a high-quality research project that from the beginning was designed as a means of promoting high-quality assessment on institution and general education outcomes. So as I said, from the beginning, this study was designed for assessment. We looked at a variety of outcomes, things like critical thinking, openness to diversity, leadership. We asked students many questions about their experiences, both in and outside of the classroom. We also collected data from institutions on things like retention, persistence, and GPA. And we connected all that information and tried to figure out what experiences that students had an impact on the outcomes, including persistence and GPA. And then, as I said, our goal was to give that information back to institutions so they can improve student experience and student learning. We analyzed this data both overall, so looking at the entire data set to get kind of the national picture, if you will. But we also looked at things at the institutional level to see if there were differences at particular institutions, things that mattered more or less, because institutions do vary. So in essence, the Wabash study really followed Aston's IEO model at the student level for each institution. Another important part of the study was that this was free for participating institutions. We had a tremendous, wonderful grant that we used to fund this. The grant money included incentives for students to participate in the study. Institutions could add in any institutional data they wanted to the study data, so things like major credits completed, participation in specific campus programs. We got extensive advice from institutional researchers about the kind of data and reports that would be useful, and we provided a ton of data back to institutions. Huge reports, enormous data files, detailed code books, all with the idea that this would help institutions make changes that would improve student learning. And because from the beginning our goal was to use this evidence for improvement, we were thinking about how institutions could know if the changes they'd made actually improved student experience or student learning. So one of the key things in the study was that we used many free and low-cost measures of outcomes and experiences so that institutions could continue to use those measures to gauge the impact of any changes they made. And of course, we were happy to help institutions use this data to make changes, figure out how to measure the impact of their changes. This was not a, here's your report and we're done kind of study. We were constantly offering to help institutions use this data. So, after all that setup and all that thinking and planning, what happened when we did this study? Unfortunately, not all that much. And there's us, defeated, crushed at our desks. And I should say, as far as we know, not much happened, and there may be things we don't know about. But from the first cohort, around 40% of the institutions did not respond in any way to the data from the study. And that includes even disseminating the data on campus. So this was a huge bummer. There's really no other way to put it.
It's a tale of woe.
It is a tale of woe. But we learned some things from this. And we realized fairly early on that we'd gotten some things wrong. We'd made some assumptions and we just missed some really important factors. So a few of the assumptions that we made. First off, we assumed that institutions lacked data. And that was not the case. Institutions in the study had plenty of data. In fact, sometimes the Wabash study discovered or rediscovered things that institutions already knew. Well, maybe that's a too high a bar. Things that someone at an institution already knew. Second assumption was that we thought evidence that institutions had wasn't good enough. It wasn't a good enough quality. So we thought that if we gave people better evidence, things would change. And we designed the study to give people gold standard level of evidence. Then the third assumption we made was that, change was really dependent on the reports. It was all about the reports. So if we got people a bunch of data in a variety of formats, they would do something with it. And with all these assumptions, the thing that we didn't see or realize was that evidence is really only a small part of the story when it comes to making changes. A very small part. And think of climate change here, where there's a lot of evidence, but many people still don't believe the evidence, and even if they do, they're not sure what to do with it. So we did not see how cultural, structural, and resource issues play a huge role at institutions in even determining what evidence would matter. But we were not defeated. we tried to learn from this, and we did change our approach with institutions from right at the beginning, and we started working more closely with people. We went and did site visits to institutions in the study. We held workshops where people from institutions could come together and talk with each other about how they were making sense of and responding to the evidence. And we have spent the past 9 or 10 years working with people across the country after the study on issues of assessment, trying to help people use evidence to improve student learning. And as we've been working with institutions in these past 10 years or so, we have learned a lot. And part of what we've realized is that we missed a few other things when we created the Wabash study. And it's taken us a little longer to figure these things out. And these things that we missed have really important implications for the assessment work that we're all doing. So when we did the Wabash study, we assumed that institutions who participated in the study had the goal of improving student learning. This was just implicit for us. We didn't question it, it just was. We thought about the study, I mean, why else would an institution join this study? We did not realize that many of the institutions who participated in the study did so to find out if what they were doing was okay. They weren't focused on improving student learning. Now, that's not to say they said, well, we're not trying to improve student learning. I mean, nobody can argue with that. But institutions' goal was really to kind of check what they were doing, get a temperature check. We heard people talk about the study as sort of assessment in a box to give them a sense of how their students were doing on a range of outcomes. And I think most people assumed they were doing okay too, and thought or hoped the study would give them evidence that they could show to accreditors and other skeptics. So given all the mistaken assumptions that we had and the things that we missed, I suppose it's not terribly surprising that the Wabash study didn't lead to large-scale improvement in student learning. And as we've continued working with institutions on assessment projects, we've made it a point to say that the goal of assessment is to improve student learning. But unfortunately, in the past 10 years, we still have not seen a lot of learning improvement. And we're not the only ones who've noted the lack of improvement in student learning. Both insiders in higher education and assessment have noted this, and outsiders have as well. And I think in this time of budget cuts and new efficiencies, which is a nice way of saying doing more with less, assessment often becomes an easy target. In the past year or so, there have been a few articles that raised concerns about assessment that have gotten a lot of publicity. And we want to touch on a few of these, and they may be familiar to you. The first article was written by Molly Worthen, who's a history professor at UNC Chapel Hill. She wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in 2018 called "The Misguided Drive to Measure Learning Outcomes." So obviously a supportive assessment piece here. And a part of this, which is here in the quote on the screen, said, "I teach at a big state university, and I often receive emails from software companies offering to help me do a basic part of my job, figuring out what my students have learned. It's true that old-fashioned course grades, skewed by grade inflation and inconsistency among schools and disciplines, can't tell us everything about what students have learned. But the ballooning assessment industry, including the tech companies and consulting firms that profit from assessment, is a symptom of higher education's crisis, not a solution to it. Without thoughtful reconsideration, learning assessment will continue to devour a lot of money for meager results."
It's nice to be part of a ballooning industry.
Exactly. I think I missed that.
We all feel like you're part of a ballooning industry.
And I think as a faculty member in the humanities, we could consider Worthen an outsider to assessment. But some insiders have also written pieces recently questioning assessment. So we'll turn to a piece written by David Eubanks, who's the AVP for Institutional Effectiveness at Furman University. And this is a piece called "A Guide for the Perplexed" in AALHE's publication Intersection. Eubanks said, The difficulty in using assessment results to improve academic programs is a recurring theme at assessment conferences. This topic also puzzled me greatly for years. I read books and attended conference sessions that described how to define learning outcomes, create rubrics, map a curriculum, and so on. The theory was beautifully simple. Set a goal, measure the goal, then use the data to make adjustments. It was that last part where everything seemed to fall apart. If you have wondered why it is so difficult to use the outputs of standard assessment practices into a credible understanding of learning, you may have at times felt, like I have, that you are simply not following the script closely enough. My conclusion is that it is difficult to use assessment results because the methods of gathering and analyzing data are very poor.
So you're probably wondering where the turn to the positive is coming. So we'll get there in a second. So I think the thing is, what we don't want to do is get to a full-blooded, can we combat the critics? So I think we actually want to think about what the critics are saying a little bit. And I actually think that in many ways assessment has been enormously successful at the tasks to which we've put it. But sometimes in our conversations about assessment, we're not clear on the tasks that we're putting it to mangle that sentence. But before we go on to that, I want to have one more sunny, optimistic quote I want to pull from an article, which was just from a chestnut dropped by Eric Gilbert yesterday in his brilliantly entitled article, "Assessment is an Enormous Waste of Time." And what he said, before he said that maybe we should get rid of the idea that learning is the goal of college, he said, "We seem to be on a similar path to assessment. The fundamental claim of the assessment industry is that by measuring one thing, student learning, it can show us how to improve our courses, curricula, and colleges." And I really want to, this one really grabbed me because I think it gets to the issue a little bit of this notion of we have people defining for us or articulating the purpose of assessment in really broad ways and interesting ways. And so what we really want to do is just think about, for a second, use this as a stepping up point, and just think to yourselves, is the goal of assessment to show us how to improve our courses, curriculum, and college? Think about it. Is it to show us how? Okay. So that's what we're going to sort of deliberate out for the next few minutes and really think about assessment and what it's supposed to do and the different design, the different ways that assessment is designed to work and the different questions it's been asked to address. And so what we're going to do is, and this is a you can count this as a learning lesson if you were born after 1970, but we're going to say assessment, what is it good for, using the great song War by Edwin Starr. Think of that melody in your head if you're old enough to remember that melody. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing, at least according to some. Say it again. So what is it good for? What is assessment really good for? So actually, this is actually, I would say, a longer term topic. What purpose does it serve? In 2009, Peter Ewell published a paper in NILOA called Assessment, Accountability, and Improvement, Revisiting the Tension, right? Like a good academic paper, it has a colon in it and has a second sentence. And he said revisiting the tension because, as he says in the article, it was actually coming back to something he raised in 1987 at a conference about this difference between different kinds of assessment. And he talked about two kinds of assessment in particular. He talked about a tension, between two assessment paradigms: assessment for improvement and assessment for accountability. Okay, paradigms. And I want you just to think for a few minutes about the word paradigm before you go on, because it's not like two different assessment methods or two different ways of doing assessment. Paradigm, and I rather than going back to Thomas Kuhn, I stole this from the definition from the source of all human knowledge, Wikipedia. A distinct set of concepts or thought patterns, including theories, research methods, and postulates and standards for what constitutes legitimate contributions to a field. That's really a big deal. Think about it. What are the distinct ways assessment can be legitimate? And you will talk about these two, as he said. He talked about, this is how he describes them in his most recent, or that paper in 2009. So he has on the left, you see, this is a table pulled right from the paper, assessment for improvement paradigm and the assessment for accountability paradigm on the right. And it's really interesting. I mean, he talks about that there's a different intent, right? Assessment for improvement has a formative intent. Assessment for accountability has a summative one. That there's a stance. Who's your audience? For improvement is internal. For accountability is external. What's your predominant ethos? It's engagement versus compliance. and even the idea that there are different methods and so on, and different ways of doing the data and communicating the data, and how the data are shared in some ways. And so in one sense, just looking at my notes here, even though these are both forms of assessment, they're addressing very different questions. One is asking what kinds of evidence and methods and forms of communication improve something, and the other is asking what methods and evidence and forms of communication do we use to show that we're living up to our promise. And if you think about the difference between those two things right away, you're really talking about not just different questions, but different methods that are appropriate to those questions. So because we, Peter Yule did this in 2009, we feel like he's a pillar in the assessment field, but we feel insecure and the need to one-up Peter. So he talked about two methods. We're going to talk about three approaches, three paradigms. And we've included a shot of soft, fuzzy animals because, well, why not? We need something to pep us up after all that negative talk. So, so we're going to suggest that there are three assessment paradigms, okay? And what we're going to suggest, we're going to describe these three in a few minutes. We're going to say that only one of these paradigms is really designed to help us improve student learning. Okay, that's not to say the other paradigms, and we want to stress this right from the start. That's not to say that the other paradigms aren't equally important or important to our institutions and important to our external constituencies. They're all important, but the paradigms lead us very, very different directions in terms of what kind of conclusions we can draw from the assessment evidence we gather, and even what kind of assessment evidence we gather. The last thing is we want to say, and this is the real goal here, is that what we hope to do or point out is that when you start assessment projects, you should be mindful of what questions you're asking. And not to accuse anybody of doing this, but before sending out a note to the listserv asking about rubrics, whether you should pay your faculty, which is a nice, interesting recent thing in the assess listserv, or how large your sample should be, all good questions, you might step first back and say, what am I trying to accomplish? What are our goals here? Okay, before we get into the technical details of the methods we want to apply. So with that, let's go through the different kinds of assessment. There are three paradigms. So we think there are three assessment paradigms. We've not given them technical names. We're not technical people, but here they are. There's assessment for keeping an eye on things. That's the first paradigm. The second one is assessment for promoting engagement and change. And by engagement and change, we mean engagement by educators, faculty and staff, and changes that they might engage, that faculty and staff might engage in as a result of the assessment. And then finally, assessment for improving student learning, okay? And we're really intentional about using the word for here, assessment for doing one thing, assessment for doing something else, assessment for doing a third thing. We think the idea of thinking what your assessment is for is really important. Okay. Now, in terms of how often these things happen, I'd say in our, we have not randomly sampled the assessment field, but in our visits and our work with institutions, I think for right now, the most common form of assessment is going to be the assessment for keeping an eye on things. We'll describe that in a minute. I'd say that this notion of assessment for promoting engagement by educators and the idea that might change things, that's becoming more common. And it's something that people will highlight in good assessment programs, this kind of practice. And then I'd say the assessment for actually improving student learning, assessment that's designed in a way to actually foment change and test the impact of change, is really rare. It's the unicorn of assessment. But we say it actually does exist because we like unicorns which actually exist. This does actually happen in the world, and we'll point to some examples. Okay, so let's go through these assessment the paradigms or ways of doing by one at a time here. So the first one, as we said, was assessment for keeping an eye on things. So what does assessment that's used for keeping an eye on things do? Well, it addresses some basic questions like, are our students meeting some basic goals or minimum standards? Or are we meeting some minimum standards? Are they proficient in writing in the ways we say? Are they proficient in civic engagement in the way we say? Are they proficient according to some professional standards for a pre-professional or a professional major, the way we say? Are students doing as well after college as they should be, either in terms of basic salary or engaging the community, or in terms of their professional success or their work in their new jobs, right? So it's sort of saying, are we meeting these goals? And in terms of the methods, well, we see a lot of this kind of assessment, I would say, and I don't mean to diminish it at all, this is a lot like what you see if you're working in a factory and you're doing quality control, right? That relies heavily on sampling. So you're manufacturing some interesting piece, interesting widget, the widget's flowing down in front of you. You grab every 10th widget or 15th widget, you look at it, and you say, let's see if this widget looks like our widgets are supposed to look. And hopefully they look fine, and the assembly line keeps rolling. But if they don't look fine, it's like, oh, there's a problem here. Let's note that. Okay. And so we've been places, examples of this kind of assessment are when people might gather student work, like capstone work in professional majors, and have outsiders evaluate them. Or they might require samples of students to take standardized tests. Or they might ask, we've seen people that across the institution, faculty are asked to select 5 pieces of student work in their section, or 4 pieces or 6 pieces or whatever, grade them according to a rubric, which can be from very, very simple to more complex, and upload their scores into software, which someone will then summarize later on for an accreditation report. We've also seen people who survey the employers or graduate schools to which the students go after they graduate, or get their degrees, and find out, how are they doing? Are they doing well in their jobs and so on? So this kind of method relies heavily on sampling. And the goal, and this shouldn't be at all a surprise to you, but this kind of assessment, this is probably very familiar, and the goal is to assure key constituencies that a reasonable number of students are learning what they're supposed to be learning and detect whether any problems or not. And the primary activity here is measurement. Measurement, doing rubrics, doing standardized tests, doing things. Are they achieving by a certain criterion? And the thing about measurement is that measurement is not improvement. Repeated measurement is not improvement. As Keston Fulcher and Megan Good and Chris Coleman and Kristen Smith have pointed out, that simply repeatedly measuring something has no impact on it. I love this. This is a great. We love this article as well as the little pigs that James Madison seems to distribute everywhere they go. The little plastic pigs. But as I say, a pig is never fattened up only because it was weighed. A racehorse never ran faster because a stopwatch was clicked. A fevered dog's temperature never dropped as a result of reading a thermometer. Nevertheless, some infer that student learning will automatically improve as a result of assessment, of being measured. And so when we say this form of assessment is not designed to improve on student learning, right? Measuring something doesn't improve it. We think that the theory behind it, we know the theory behind it is that if you find something that doesn't measure up, that will prompt some response that may improve learning. But to be fair, 2 things. One, many responses we see when, if people give their students the major field test or have them take the CLA or whatever, and it doesn't come up to standard, what we often see as a response to it has nothing to do with changing educational conditions. It often comes with reflection saying, maybe we need to revise the outcome, or maybe our sampling was bad, we need to sample again, or maybe we need to revise the rubric, or maybe we need to adopt a different test, or maybe we need to lower the criterion which we count as passing for the test. That is, there are all sorts of changes that are involved with the scoring. And the second thing is a side note that's not up here in the slide, but as I said, I think what a lot of the accountability measures is this notion that if we force institutions to be public about how well their students are not, that will provide them with incentives to change and get better should the students fall short. And it assumes, and this is something we'll turn to later, that getting better is easy to do. The only reason you're not doing it is you're kind of lazy or whatever. And if you see the low scores in the public and you're embarrassed, you'll do something about it. But it's really interesting to contemplate. I did this a couple of years ago. If you look at like new businesses which are very motivated to do well, which are collecting all sorts of data and evidence about how much the cash is flowing in, how much is flowing out, and so on. And these are entities which are really incentivized to try and figure out when they're not doing well. And yet the vast majority of businesses, restaurants, so on, those startups fail. Just something to keep in mind, and we'll come back to this point. Okay, so here's a second paradigm of assessment we've seen as well out there, and this is assessment for promoting engagement and change. And it addresses questions that are very similar to almost identical to the ones that assessment for keeping an eye on things addressed. Again, are students meeting goals? Are they meeting certain minimum standards? Are they doing well after college? So it's about meeting a criterion again. The method, again, is emphasized on sampling. So you will, sample students who are coming out and give them major field tests, or sample students who are taking the CLA. We understand this is different in professional things, like all the nurses will take NCLEX and so on. But for a lot of them, it's sampling papers from general education courses. But what's different about this is that a lot of assessment folks are doing really good work of moving from just, let's get a test score, let's get scores for a sample of students, to can we engage the teachers, the staff who are helping our students learn or teaching classes or doing programs? Can we get them together to make sense of the evidence and identify possible changes? So in addition to the measuring part, there's this idea of can we create conversations that are educationally formative? It includes standardized tests, but also uses some evaluation of student work typically. I think more and more we see that with the value rubrics and other rubrics, that with general education and a lot of programs, people are using student work as a thing they want to evaluate to make sense of where they might be falling short and get some ideas about what they might change. And this is a more communicative one. We certainly have been to places where people, and this gets back to paradigm one, if you want to call it that, where people are doing assessment, they plug something into software, and it goes off to an accreditation place where it's rolled into a report, and the person who submitted the data never hears about it again. And so they have no idea what happens to it. But in this approach, people really are working at disseminating information to the educators, setting up memos, meetings, doing workshops, and really doing important work there. And so like the other one, one of the outcomes of this approach is to assure constituencies that students are meeting or learning what they're supposed to be learning. That's one. But the other one is to communicate to and with colleagues, to create communication, information about student learning that's shared across departments and programs and so on. And to foment changes. People want changes to take place as a result of this. And the primary activities are measurement, conversation, group work, and dissemination. And we said this approach assessment is designed to promote educator engagement and changes that may, and here's the thing, may result in improved student learning. We're going to come back to that may in a second. This is where you often hear things like evidence-based or evidence-driven decisions. We use evidence to make decisions to change part of our program or our capstone or the kind of internships we have students. It's designed to engage educators in meaningful work on student learning and not just, some sort of thing that they're doing bureaucratically to take care of accreditation. And I think the hope behind it is that identifying, making changes that seem pedagogically sound will improve student learning. Right? I mean, if you're listening to this and thinking, yeah, this is what I'm trying to do, we're doing changes. Well, a lot of them are trying to foment the changes, but in many cases, the changes are not systematic. That is, you're engaging the faculty who will come to programs, right? And the extent of the changes or the impact changes is never measured afterwards. That is, the number of faculty who take up this new thing or the number of courses that take up this change, we don't know. And we've made improvements. The improvements are guided by the evidence, or we think we've made improvements. We've made changes, but we actually don't measure the impact of it. And so this happens a fair amount. People talk a lot about changes, but they don't look at the impact of it. And I think here's a recent example of a really wonderful program that's doing all sorts of interesting things, but it's not getting at what happened, what's the impact of our changes. And they actually say so very explicitly, and I really appreciate that. So at NILO, the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, they highlight different assessment programs. This is a case study of a really interesting and wonderful program at Washington State University. And Pat Hutchings went out and did a summary report on this case, and it's available on their website. And it's really interesting to look at, especially the extent to which they've really engaged faculty across a number of departments in doing some good work with assessment. So, but here's a report, and this gets at the point I was trying to make. In neuroscience, assessment has evolved. This is one of the paragraphs of the report where they're talking about the impact of assessment. In neuroscience, assessment has evolved to include multiple methods. With the program capstone course as a vehicle, neuroscience majors make a 10-minute presentation, which is assessed, by 3 faculty members using a shared rubric. Okay, that's great. Also in play are findings from the National Survey of Student Engagement, disaggregated in ways that more usefully illuminate department-specific issues. Additionally, to supplement findings from both of these sources, neuroscience has instituted student focus groups. Again, this is awesome, triangulating evidence. Together, these activities have prompted a number of curricular revisions, including a change in the course. I'm going to flip over here. Change in the course sequence, and a move to make an important 300-level course into a 2-semester requirement. Again, this all sounds good, makes sense even to me reading this paragraph. But here's the last thing to say. Looking at the effect of these changes will be our next big assessment project, the program assessment coordinator says. And so this is I think the rub of it. This assessment is designed to promote change. It's designed with the idea that we hope change is taking place as a result of these things, but we actually don't have the time, sometimes energy, capacity to look at the impact of the changes, right? These are changes, they're well-intended changes, and they're informed changes. But, and we'll get into this a little bit more, you know, if you've ever done research on education, you know that changing the environment is actually a really tricky thing, and that a lot of things which make sense as having impact don't end up having it, or even have negative impact. Okay, and that leads us to our third paradigm for assessment, and that's assessment for improving student learning. And this addresses such questions, and this, you'll see the questions now changed. Did a particular change or intervention or set of changes we made in our program to alter students' experiences have an impact? Did the change make it more likely that students are meeting some standard? Did the change improve student success in particular areas after college? These are examples of questions. And you notice here is like, did the change? It's not showing where students are, but did the change have impact? The methods, they're not necessarily longitudinal, but they often follow the measure, make an intervention, and measure method, we call it, which is you have a baseline of some sort, you do something new, and then you measure again. It could be a different cohort or whatever, but you're looking to see if there's some difference that happens after you've made this change. And because you're trying to really gauge change, it's best to have more precise measures that have less noise in them, qualitative or quantitative, that's appropriate to the outcome and the number of students in the program. You know, it's possible that you could measure change in some of the previous ones, but it's not necessarily, it may not, the methods are they're like an assessment paradigm too, the improvement method is often difficult. They can be difficult to gauge whether change has taken place. Now, I'll give you an example of why in a second after I get done here. Typically, this method, if you have a multi-section course and you want to improve something, you have to implement the change across all sections of that course and check to make sure that all sections are actually implementing the change well, so implementation fidelity. A lot of research on faculty development, it indicates when faculty say they're doing a new form of learning, let's say, you know, peer-based instruction or something, that they say it, they feel they are, but the actual extent to which they're doing it in a classroom isn't as consistent as you might think. Okay, maybe repeat it for more than one cohort and may consider learning on the individual and not just group level. So I want to just stop right here and just step back and think about this for a second. You know, if we go back to this form of learning, why doesn't this form of learning necessarily promote, or why would this form of learning, or excuse me, this form of assessment, why would this form of assessment be less likely to promote student learning? You're identifying changes that seem to be informed by data. Why not? So we actually took time to write up a little scenario, imagining going back to this previous paradigm of what we've seen oftentimes with the general education thing, to give you a sense of why evidence-informed changes may not be effective in changing things because they're not systematic. So here's our little narrative. Suppose you have a general education course at your university that's taught by 50 faculty and taken by 1,500 students. So for most of you, that's a tiny course, but for some mid-sized university, it's a little bigger. This is a course that's designed to help students meet a particular outcome, say ethical reasoning. So you ask the 50 faculty to designate an assignment that prompts ethical reasoning, and then ask them to each sample papers, 5 papers from their students that they wrote in response to that assignment. Okay, so you ask 50 faculty to do so. Well, let's suppose that 40 out of 50 comply. Some places it's less. And while you've asked them to do it randomly, please randomly select 5 papers, you know they probably aren't, or well, they probably aren't. So let's say that you get 40 to comply and you got your 5 papers, so you got a total of 200 papers. Then you ask faculty, the 50 faculty, you invite them to attend a one-day summer workshop to review the papers. 25 show up. And after norming in the morning, they each review, discuss, and I'll call it rubricate, we'll do a rubric to 5 papers. So that gives you a total of 125 papers out of the 200. They converse, identify some issues they'd like to improve based on the review, and the workshop leaders write a memo suggesting the faculty revise their assignment prompts in a particular way. So far, so good. We're looking at a change here. They send the memo out via email. 35 faculty open the email out of the 50. 15 don't. Of the 30 who opened it, 5 thought it was nonsense, and their assignments were fine. They didn't need to do anything, but 25 took it seriously. And then the course directors working with the Teaching and Learning Committee set up an assignment redesign workshop and invite all 50 faculty to attend. 25 say they want to attend, and only 20 end up attending the workshop, and unfortunately 5 leave early. But all 20 who attend the workshop revise their assignments. but most of them, after they leave the workshop, continue to tinker with the assignment over the next couple of weeks, and no one subsequently reviews this. No one from the Teaching Learning Center reviews the revised assignments to see if they're actually still enacting the redesign principles. But let's suppose that 15 out of the 20 revised the assignment the way it was intended. That means this will impact about a third of the students in the course. So all this work, this decision change is happening, is hitting a small fraction of the faculty in the course. But will that show up next year when the assessment folks sample 5 papers per section? Well, probably not. You have 15 faculty made the revision. You're going to only get that means only about 60 to 200 papers to get back will come from those faculty, and you only reviewed a fraction of those, so you probably only see 35 of those papers. But wait a minute. If they're like most institutions, they're actually not going to assess that outcome for another 2 or 3 years because they're on a rotation where they're assessing 3 outcomes per year. So you have an evidence-informed decision. You've got it. You've changed the course. Will it have impact? Would you even know if it had impact? How much of an impact could it have? And so that's why in this situation where you have assessment for improving student learning, it really focuses on having consistent changes across all the sections where students are encountering the things that are prompting the outcome. So the outcome here is to determine whether or not a change or set of changes made the desired difference. There's lots of group work. You have to have, if you're in a program, you have to have people get together to measure, develop, and implement the intervention, to agree on what it should be, to remeasure and make sense of the findings. So there's a lot of collaborative work here. And the last thing we would say is that people who do this may not find that an intervention made a difference, but they're, in our view, still following a paradigm because they're following a paradigm that uses a research design or assessment design that would allow them to see whether a change had taken place. Whereas the other ones we think would be much harder to see whether there's impact.
So, as Charlie said, assessment for improving student learning is rare, but it does happen. And we have 2 examples here. The first on the left is from James Madison University, and it shows program-level learning improvement in the computer information systems major. And faculty there realized that students were not as effective as they wanted them to be at an important skill, and a group of faculty worked together to make a variety of changes across a series of courses in the major. They evaluated student performance after the changes and saw an increase in rubric scores. And this article about this process has been published in Research and Practice in Assessment. The other example on the right is from the Collaborative Humanities Redesign Project, and this showed course-level learning improvement across a variety of courses at 4 institutions. 27 faculty from various humanities disciplines identified an area for improvement in one of their courses, and again, they had a baseline measure, they made a change, they measured the impact of that, and if you are interested in learning more about that, you can go to the University of Kansas Center for Teaching Excellence website because the faculty involved in this project posted their portfolios there. So we think these are both very useful examples. So now, at this point, you might be thinking, this learning improvement stuff sounds really hard. Who has time for that? And you'd be right. It is hard and it takes a lot of time. But despite this, people do assessment for improving student learning. So who does that? And we think people who do this generally fall into one of 2 categories. First category is people who have intrinsic motivation to improve student learning, and they have the time, space, and resources to do so. And the combination here is really hard because a lot of people may be motivated to do this but not have the time or support to do so. The second group of people are those who've been doing assessment in one of the first 2 paradigms and realized through that work that student learning isn't where they want it to be and have the desire or feel like they need to do something to make it different.
So I'll finish up here by saying it's a couple things. One is that I think some of the criticism that assessment isn't improving student learning are actually in some ways founded in reality. Although they're taking they're not recognizing the complexity of our assessment and the different valid goals that assessment has. Even though we sometimes talk about assessment as a method of improving student learning, that's not the most immediate goal of most of assessment. And it's doing other important things. We need to confirm to outside constituencies that are doing our work. That's critical. But that may not be the best. The way we do that may not be the best method for actually improving something should we find that something is not going as well as we'd like. Secondly, I would just return to the Eric Gilbert thing, and I really want to highlight this because I want to highlight the difficulty when we come to this issue of why aren't you improving things. Gilbert says, no, so to return to Eric Gilbert, no form of assessment, we would argue, is designed to show us how to improve our courses, college, and curricula. It's designed to show us what needs improving, not how we should improve it. Okay, and do not underplay how challenging it is to know what intervention will make a real difference. It's not like this stuff just falls out of the sky, or you do some data collection and you see students are falling short in a particular thing on a particular outcome. It's like, oh, well, we just do X and it's changed. That's really hard. Assessment points, it's like a dashboard warning light in the car ultimately. A lot of our assessment says something's going on here. To actually get at interventions that may do it and then do the test to see if the intervention had an effect, that's a big deal. And a lot of us are not resourced to do that. And a lot of faculty aren't resourced to do it or have the support we need to do that well. However, what we would say is when you do finally have something that looks like you really need to change it, you've done your first paradigm one or two of assessment that we've talked about, and you really change something, you'd be advised not to try and use methods for assessment that are appropriate for engaging faculty but not evaluating change, or for just showing to outsiders that you're doing that the paradigm 1 and 2 we talked about are effective ways of seeing whether an intervention made a difference. They're not sensitive enough to pick up the impact of changes that you produced. And with that, questions, arguments, provocations, whatever. We're finished.
Thank you so much, Charlie and Kathy. Wow, what a great session, and how much we have learned. And I'm looking at this in terms of this series, and after the introduction that Keston and Megan gave us last week, and now getting into this whole notion of, okay, so we've been doing this assessment, and what do we know about it? And I really appreciate your 3 paradigms. I think that just makes so much sense. And I also really like your point there near the end of, is the assessment, supposed to be improving, or is it showing us that there's a problem? And then, this is where in future sessions we're going to get into the how of doing this, and particularly by involving faculty learning centers on campuses. So again, thank you both so very much. And we do have a couple of questions that have come in, and if anyone has questions, please put them in the question and answer slot or in the chat, and we'll get to them. So one of the questions for you guys is the argument that the later paradigms are better than the earlier paradigms?
No.
No, I think we would say that all 3 paradigms are valid and useful, just for different purposes. Right. And also, I think it's understandable. The 3rd paradigm takes much more time and effort, yep. And it's just not realistic to expect that people would use the 3rd paradigm all the time. Yeah. There are many reasons why people would use the first 2 paradigms.
Yeah, so it is valid for us to try, we think it's reasonable for outside constituencies to ask, are you doing your job? Mm-hmm. We're funded by outside constituencies. That's a reasonable thing to do. There's a way of measuring things that's appropriate to that task. We think that engaging more faculty and other educators in the process of making sense of and using data, and even thinking about changes, that's also great too, and it builds on the first one. And again, the methods there are, as Kathy said, require less. Mm-hmm. They require more effort because you're getting faculty, but they require less. But we also think, finally, that 3rd thing is an arrow in your quiver if things aren't working well as you'd like. And it's really important to think of how I would design something if we need to improve it in a way that I could detect intervention, the effect of an intervention. Yeah.
Well, and I would also just add that personally, I would like to see the 3rd paradigm occurring more often than it is now. I understand why that's challenging, but it would be great to see a little more of that because I would love to see student learning improve. As I think we all would.
Exactly. And then a question around the terminology, and we struggle with this all the time in our assessment world, but should we really keep trying to apply the same word to these different processes with different goals?
That's a great question.
It is a great question.
I think I would say no. I mean, part of what we're trying to do is say assessment's a broad, it's like saying biology, right? It covers a broad range of activities which have different purposes. And I think that's why we're trying to say, let's start with the purpose. And if we could rename them something less kludgy than our assessment for keeping an eye on things, whatever, or whatever ones other folks came up with, I think that'd be better, as opposed to this big umbrella, which then people can build straw person cases out of when they attack it.
Very good. And then a question around the notion of option 3 being pretty much SODAL, which requires particular skills and a long time frame. Any suggestions for engaging faculty in this and how to ensure that institutions honor SODAL?
So that's a small question because I want to make it worse. It's actually harder than SODAL. So, and I'll say why. I think a lot of SODAL projects we've been involved with involve faculty working at the course level, their course. Whereas if you're looking at the program level, let's say, the chemistry major or a major in English, you're actually asking faculty across courses how they might structure and sequence the students' experiences to add up to more. So that means getting faculty across sections to agree to do things and change a certain way. So we actually think it's harder than basic SODAL. Sorry. But
bringing it down again.
But I do think,
yes.
And I think this is an extra burden on people doing assessment. I think engaging educational developers is huge. That when it starts coming to really changing paradigm, changing pedagogy and so on, getting your educational developers, if you have them on campus, or seeking out the help of educational developers from the outside is really important. That's their expertise.
Great. So we're at the top of the hour, and we still have a couple of other things we want to do very quickly. And one of the questions, by the way, that's come up, and I apologize that I think I forgot to say this in the beginning, but this webinar was recorded, and we will be sharing it with folks. Folks are asking if they may share it around their campus, and that's absolutely what we'd love for you to do. And so if you signed up to be here, you will be receiving a message and a recording. And Charlie and Kathy are also happy to share their slideshow presentation to go along with that. So we appreciate that so very much. You guys just did a tremendous job, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate it and look forward to continuing this conversation. So thanks. And any other questions, by the way, that if you have them and we didn't get to them or didn't see them, please make sure that you can send us a message to our website, and we'll get the questions to Charlie and Kathy and get back to you.
And we included our email addresses in the slides too, so don't hesitate to contact us. Great.
So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Betsy, who is our Vice President of Marketing and Sales, and she has a couple of comments to make.
Thanks, Ray. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Weave's software, because in addition to providing these educational experiences, we also offer some fantastic software. What separates us from the other tech companies and the other software available is that we were designed by educators for educators. And we're still staffed with educators today. So most of the staff of Weave actually has worked on a college campus using Weave to help build a culture of continuous improvement. And that's really what it's all about. So this is what's included in our software: assessment, accreditation, credentials management, program review, and strategic planning. It is one software, so there are never any modules to buy. We're in a continuous development cycle, so we're always rolling out new tools for our members. And most of the tools that we create are suggested by our members. So Weave is more than just a software. It's more than just the educational opportunities. It's really a community of assessment professionals. And along the lines of more, if you probably have already seen our Weave Knowledge Center if you signed up to see this webinar, but at weaveeducation.com, that's where you'll find information on all of the webinars we've ever done. You can listen to them on demand. And we also have something that we're calling the Weave Toolkit. And this is for our members, although we're happy to provide it for other folks too. And this is a link that you can add to the assessment page on your website. And it allows your faculty and staff who maybe need a refresher course on how to do great assessment work. It includes webinars and tip sheets, all designed for the end users, for the folks on the front line doing this assessment work. And as always with Weave, anytime you're a member of Weave, you're familiar already probably with our incredible customer engagement team. They work with you they really become an extension of your office to make sure that not only you get the most value out of the software possible, but you can really build and maintain that culture of assessment on your campus. And with that, I will say thank you so much.
Betsy, by the way, I just happen to remember also if you want to launch the poll to see if anyone is interested.
I would love to.
And this has been great. We'll do this poll, and if you'd like to fill that out for us, that would be great. We look forward to our next webinar, which is going to be coming up in about 2 weeks, and information is on the website for that, and we'll be sending out that information soon.
And if you're listening to this in the recorded form and you would like a demo, just head over to our website at weaveeducation.com and hit request a demo.
Excellent. Thanks, you.
Everybody.
Thanks, Charlie and Kathy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.